Our next paper bears the title, Just Keep Swimming, Why Christians Are Called to Conserve, Even When It May Be to Our Detriment. Please welcome Luke Sachs.
California needs housing. Californians have been experiencing a housing epidemic since 2008 and are looking for any solution. Luckily, new housing developments are being built across the state to help alleviate this issue. One such housing development is a local one named 5 Point Valencia, just past Magic Mountain. It's offering 21,000 new homes, which will provide much-needed housing for California residents who are trying to move into better living conditions. But this housing development has actually been ready to begin construction for over 25 years and is only beginning now. Why? A fish. A small type of fish, only 2 to 4 inches long, was the reason this $12 billion master-planned mega real estate community was prevented from beginning construction for over 25 years. And I would argue that this was the correct way for this situation to have played out. The story of 5 Point Valencia starts out with an unassuming area of land. This land was owned by a housing company named Newhall Land and Farming and was named Newhall Ranch. The owners of Newhall Land decided to try and make something out of this area, and so they started construction on a new housing development. Unfortunately, this area contained a portion of the Santa Clara River, in which lived a number of different species of animals. The most notable of these species was a small type of fish named the unarmored three-spined stickleback. This fish was the main reason behind the project's long delay because it gave the conservationists a reason to step in and make Newhall Land agree to a deal that secured their protections. There are two sides to any conservation discussion. One arguing that we can't encroach on animals' land, and the other arguing that we can do whatever we want to them. Then there's this sweet spot right in between these two extremes where 5 Point Valencia ended up in. Looking back on 5 Point's project, I would argue that the conservationists were in the right to stop this project and make 5 Point agree to a deal that secured conservation interests, because the conservation of these endangered fish was more important than the project's goal to provide housing and make money. Conservation can be defined as the restoring or protecting of the natural environment and of wildlife, summarized as the prevention of the waste or loss of life. The idea of keeping nature static or unchanging actually refers to a different type of environmentalism called preservation, which is distinct from conservation. An endangered species should be defined as a species or subspecies that have low population numbers. This is because, one, subspecies are different enough where they would need to be evaluated separately, and two, we should value a wanted population of a species differently from an unwanted one. In Genesis 1:28, God calls man to have dominion over the fish of the sea and the birds in the heavens, and over all the earth, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. I argue that this verse is only a partial command, and to truly understand God's intentions, we must look at two other places in Genesis. One, during creation, and two, before the flood. In the beginning, God made everything, and after he made anything, he called it good. This includes every single animal that God made, meaning that he has given them intrinsic value that we must recognize and respect. Later in Genesis, God is going to flood the earth, and he tells Noah to make an ark. This ark served two purposes. One, to provide Noah and his family a way to survive the flood, and two, to keep every kind of animal from going extinct. This fact is important because it tells us that God wishes to conserve every kind of animal and that he made sure that they were conserved. If we're to act according to God's will, we must do the same. The next time a housing project is proposed and is in conflict with conservation interests, like 5 Point Valencia, the best option would be to conserve the environment through deals that provide for and secure this conservation, while also allowing the building project to continue on to construction. Now, one possible counter-argument is that the term kinds, used to refer to groups of animals in Genesis, actually does not refer to species, which would discount a majority of my argument. But I argue that kinds must refer to species, and the reasoning lies earlier in Genesis. When God made animals in Genesis 1:24 through 25, he said that they shall come forth or reproduce according to their kinds. This sets up the definition of kinds as being animals that reproduce together. This is the same way that we define species. For two animals to be of the same species, they must be able to reproduce and have viable or fertile offspring. This sets up species, our definition, being the exact same definition as kinds used in Genesis. So, at the broadest, kinds must refer to species, if not subspecies. This simple fact only further proves my argument that we are called to conserve all animals. Back on 5 Point Valencia, some might argue that the conservationists must be in the wrong because they're keeping Californians out of housing. But I would argue that the housing companies are the ones actually at fault. While it is true that the conservationists would not back down without ensuring conservation, we must remember that the housing companies are avoiding doing what is right. Since the conservationists were trying to save these endangered fish, and conservation is God's desire, we must recognize that the housing companies were actively fighting against doing the right thing, and that we are called to side with what is according to God's will. The disregard of these endangered species defies our call to conservation, and we must fight to save them. These endangered animals, God's creation, are being driven to extinction just so that some building project can happen a little bit faster. All the while, we're all too comfortable staying unaware and idle, not living up to our responsibilities given to us by God. We must fight to save these animals because they cannot save themselves. Thank you.